I could tell Superman stories till the end of time. I mean, everybody says, oh, he's a hard character to write. Oh, just no, he's the easiest character in the world to write. It's just, you got to get in that head. You got to think about what your life would be like if you were that alone, if you were that apart from humanity and yet trying to be part of it. What the tragedies that you have to deal with, the responsibility on you be to always use your powers for good and never for personal gain. And when you can do anything in the world, I could write those stories to the end of time. So, I'm sure that between now and the end of time, I'll get a chance.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Comics Cube. I am with a man who needs zero introduction to the comic book universe, Mr. Mark Waid.
Thank you, sir. Good to see you.
It's good to see you too. How are you?
It's been a day, but it's okay. There's good days and there's bad days when you're a freelancer, but I'm trying to crack some code on a story and I'll get it this evening.
Great. So that now that your brain is moving story-wise, then that's the perfect time for me to ask you some questions.
Sure, hit it.
We have limited time. Now, Greg Rucka, on one of my first ever interviews for this show, called you a master of efficiency and a guy who can tell a whole story in a short space. Let's try to do that here.
Okay.
You're known in large part because of the way you approach character. Can you tell me how you managed to dissect the character, like any given character? I feel like I could give you, and you'd come right down to the root of it.
That really is kind of it. I mean, that's I enjoy doing that. It's because I've loved these characters since I was a little boy. I mean, we moved around an awful lot when I was a kid. I went to something like 8 schools in 10 years, and so I didn't have any sort of long-term friendships. But the DC characters in particular, the Marvel characters in particular, the DC characters, they were always there for me, right? They were always the constant in my life, those comics, and so I lived in their skin. I've been thinking about them my entire adult life, and the way you approach characters, you really just try to live in that skin and think about not just who that character is, but what their world would be like. With how do they perceive their world? What are they motivated by? What are they passionate about? If they've got superpowers, what does the world look like to them? What does the world look like through X-ray eyes, or what does it look like through radar vision? How does that inform how they perceive the world? These are just some of the questions I ask all the time about these characters.
And you've had definitive runs on multiple characters. You have anyone in particular that you're most proud of?
It varies. There's stuff I like about all of the stuff I've got a chance to take a swing at. I mean, I think that the Flash run was probably, like, issue for issue, some of the best stuff that I feel like I was able to do. But I look at the Fantastic Four run and I'm proud of that because that's Mike Wieringo, my artist, and when that's the secret. Like with Captain America, working with Ron Garney or Chris Samnee. I mean, come on, that's the way to go. If you're gonna, that's the stuff I feel proudest of, is the stuff where I feel like my artist and I are working as a team and we're telling the same story, we're pulling the same direction.
I have a question for you about that, about working with artists. I find this quite fascinating. In 1996, yeah, you were working with Ron Garney on Captain America. Yeah. And then a couple of years later, you were working with Ron Garney again on Captain America, and you were working with Andy Kubert on Kazar. And Andy Kubert got put on the second Captain America book, Sentinel of Liberty, in what was almost definitely the best business move. They switched those two because Andy Kubert's profile was much bigger. But I feel like there was something magical about the chemistry that you had with Ron Garney specifically on that character. Can you talk about how the alchemy of that kind of thing?
It's hard to say. I mean, we weren't as sort of close as I was with, say, Ringo or Samnee. We didn't talk as often, but he also understood that I didn't want him to be an art robot, right? It's not a matter of me turning in a script and then not caring about it until the pages come back and I look at the printed comic book. I want the artist to feel like a storyteller. So we would talk about Captain America. We would talk about what motivates not just Captain America, but also what motivates Ron. What does Ron like to draw? What does Ron really get excited about? What sends the shivers up his spine? Those are the questions you should always ask your artist. I mean, find out what they're excited about and find out what they think is a good story, and then you can pull in that same direction. I think that's what made the Garney work real well.
Especially that first run on Captain America, I thought you guys just redefined the character so well.
Thank you.
You just really got into the meat of the character. It's one of my favorite runs on the character ever.
Thank you.
How do you feel about being known as one of the greatest Captain America writers ever, one of the greatest Fantastic Four writers ever? The Flash writer.
You're very kind. It's the right amount of famous, because it's cool to be that guy and it's cool to be at conventions being that guy. And yet when I go to Starbucks, nobody cares. So it keeps my head on straight. It's everybody who works on these franchise characters, the ones that you don't own, the ones that you're just basically playing and with their toys and you're going to give them back at the end of the day, the ones that the companies own, you want to feel like you left some sort of lasting impression. It's certainly in my case, these characters gave so much to me when I was a kid, in terms of my moral compass, in terms of, making me feel, that might doesn't always make right, learning all the right ethical lessons from these superheroes when I was a kid. It feels good to be able to sort of give back, in the sense that the satisfying moments are the ones where I feel like I can do something with a character that's a long run that has, like you said, some sort of, legs to it, something where it's considered a sort of a creative milestone. Every time I say this, it sounds egotistical. I don't mean it to. I mean, you just want to be able to leave a body of work that has some sort of staying power, because it meant that you're able to leave your mark, and that feels good.
And I discovered your work. First thing I ever read of yours was The Return of Barry Allen.
Cool.
That was an amazing piece of work. I thought that, and you had an intro in the TPB with Brian Augustine.
Yeah.
That talked about how you were consciously moving away from Barry Allen. You really wanted to make Wally his own man.
Yeah.
How do you feel about, because there's comics fans, we say we want change, but we complain
Don't really.
that we do.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you feel about moving, like, knowing that you're making a conscious decision to do that? The backlash is probably going to come. Do you just trust in your talent and your instincts to carry you through? And
that's all you can do. If I wrote everything through the filter of being afraid of what the internet would say, I would never put a word on paper. I'd be paralyzed. So there's always going to be people who don't like what you do. There's always going to be people who think you made the wrong choices, but at the end of the day, they're not the ones who have to live with that story. I have to live with that story. And so my job is to try to entertain. My job is to try to educate. My job is to try to, give you some insight into these characters that you haven't had before. And, when it came to Wally, the die was cast. I mean, Barry was dead, and Barry served DC better as a dead saint than he had as a live hero in a lot of ways. I love Barry, but by the time I came on, I mean, it had been 5 years and maybe a little longer. And we figured we either can keep having Wally be nostalgic for his Barry days and not feel and have him sort of mirror the reader's feelings of, well, I don't know if this guy's up for the job, or we can just pull the Band-Aid and make it so that Wally embraces it. And hopefully if he embraces it, then you'll embrace it as a reader too. And it seems to have worked.
Can I tell you what I think is a pretty cool story about reaching out to new fans regarding your Flash run?
Sure.
So I was 12, I think, when I was reading your Flash run. And, I was bringing it to school. And at school at the time, among the 12-year-old boys, it was all Image and,
sure.
gritted teeth and everything. The girls loved it.
Yeah. Okay.
They thought it was awesome that Wally and Linda in Linda Park were.
Yeah.
Plus, I mean, the Philippines, so it was pretty cool to see an Asian
Right.
character so
Yeah.
prominently. Thought that was ahead
That's
of its
pretty cool.
time.
That's nice of you to say. And that, I mean, that was a setup from Bill Loebs, who came before me. I mean, he introduced Linda Park, but they weren't really romantic partners.
Mm-hmm.
But it made sense to me that that would be a good way to go. And I really enjoyed writing their romance. I worked out a lot of personal stuff working with those two.
And the great thing about it is, there's a lot of talk about how if you have two people with the same powers, it dilutes the main character. And you had like 6 people with the same
Yep.
powers.
Yep.
So, like,
And yet they're all individual characters. They all approach the power in a slightly different way. Nobody, I don't think any of all of the observations about the return of Barry Allen, no one has ever come to me and said you had too many flashes in it. Nobody, I felt like you had one too many speedsters in it. No one's ever said that. So, it's not the powers, it's the character.
why do you think DC struggles now with trying to make Barry and Wally coexist?
Because I don't know how they can. I mean, I wouldn't want to be in that position of trying to square that circle, because once Barry's back, he's the Flash and he's on TV. He gets a trump card. He's on TV, and most, everybody who's seen a DC movie or watched the TV show knows that the Flash is Barry Allen. So that's the audience you can't ignore. But I don't know what Wally's place is in that world. There must be. I mean, if I was able to write 6 speedsters in Return of Barry Allen, I should be able to write 2 speedsters in Flash. But they share the same name. They share the same costume. It's harder. It's harder to figure out how to differentiate them because of their close ties and their similarities.
And moving on from that, can I tell you my favorite thing you did?
Please. You can tell me that all day.
You had a Daredevil issue with a Purple Man.
Yeah.
That was, I need to ask how important that was to you, because you basically covered how mental illness would be. And I thought that was an important thing to say. And you used something that I've only ever seen Scott McCloud ever use, which is the trick ending.
Yeah.
What was the inspiration for that particular story?
The story was, this is something I've struggled with all my life, is depression. And when I came aboard Daredevil and really sort of did a deep dive on the character and tried to figure out what he was to me, I don't like writers who project themselves onto the character so heavily that it doesn't really feel like that character. If you're dealing with traumas, so that character has to deal with the same traumas, but if that but it somehow doesn't feel consistent, you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Sometimes it feels like you're reading about the writer and not the character. So I was hesitant to bring that to the table, but the more I worked on Daredevil, the more I thought about Matt Murdock, it really just seemed like a good fit to me. It seemed like, okay, here's a guy, I totally recognize the symptoms of depression in here. And to me, he was, suffering from clinical depression. And so I wrote him that way. And when I got to that story with the Purple Man, I really wanted to break him down emotionally. I wanted to break him down emotionally and show how vulnerable he was. And it tapped into everything I know. I mean, everything I said about what depression is or how it affects people or what it does to you. This is stuff that I've been thinking about for decades.
I didn't know. I'm sorry to hear that.
It just seems like it's okay. It just seems like it's a thing. It's like, it's like, diabetes or, chronic this or chronic that, whatever. It's just a thing. So you take medication for it and you blunder through life. It's okay. Of all the things that I have been extraordinarily healthy and lucky my entire life, which is amazing for a guy who eats like a 10-year-old. But I've never been in the hospital. I've never broken a bone. I've never been seriously ill. So if depression is the worst of it, that's a pretty good life.
Yeah, I was very close to somebody with a with depression.
Yeah,
A few years before that story came out, and then like things kind of fell apart on that end. And I felt like if I had seen that story and seen your portrayal of Kristen McDuffie and how she dealt with it, it would have given me kind of more of an index into how to deal with it in my personal life. I thought it was very important.
may, maybe, but never beat yourself up about that stuff because it's, you can't help somebody who can't ask for help or can't accept help. It's a hard lesson to learn, but that's at the end of the day, it's up to us individually to drag ourselves up.
Uh, so thank you for letting me know that. I'm gonna.
Of course. Yeah.
Uh, um, Another thing was I'm gonna tell you something that I think that you don't hear much.
Okay.
I like the Kingdom more than Kingdom Come.
Wow. No one has ever said those words in the English language. That is a first. Why is that? I'm kind of curious.
I liked the format that you did for it. I thought it was really unique. The fact that there's really just two issues, and then you had all of those issues in the middle telling the story in between. I like that format. I think that you could do that moving forward with a lot of stuff. But also, I just love the idea. I just love the way you reintroduced Hypertime because I'm such a big multiverse fan.
Thank you. That was a struggle because again, the edict of DC at the time was no parallel worlds, nothing like that. But we were trying to figure out what that looked like and how to sneak that in. Grant Morrison and I, and we were good. We were good friends. We were very good friends back then, hanging out a lot. And we were just sitting around editor Dan Rasper's apartment one day, and we just started talking about a way to introduce parallel worlds that wasn't quite what DC had done before. So nobody, maybe management wouldn't come down on us. And Grant started describing it. And I remember I threw out the name Hypertime, and that's kind of when it all gelled for us. And Grant was literally drawing out what Hypertime is on napkins to him. And I was, I'm, but that's one of those things where we were ahead of our time. We put it there. It lasted for like two stories. Nobody paid attention to it, and poof, it just vanishes like any other artifact from a crossover. It just kind of goes into the background until somebody picks it up years and years later. So I see it's getting a lot of play now. That's very cool.
Yeah, and one of the guys who picked up on it was Carl Kiesel, who you were very
Yeah,
close to.
very close to Carl. Yeah,
and also in 52, you guys did it again. You guys reintroduced the multiverse again.
I never thought we could do that. Is the truth of the matter is, we didn't know what 52 was when we started writing the series. We just knew it was 52 weeks, but it had to be called 52 for a reason. We bluffed our way through half of the series, not really knowing what 52 meant. And we could have gotten away with it. I mean, it's just 52 is the number of issues. We could have, no, but we wanted to make 52 mean something. I remember distinctly, Jeff Johns and I were sitting in a meeting, having a big roundtable writers meeting on this stuff. And the two of us were sitting back, and he said, 52 parallel worlds. And I leapt on him, and I'm like, we have to do that, but you have to be the one to pitch it, because Dan DiDio likes you more than he likes me. And I'm the guy who came up with Hypertime. And if I say it, he'll say no. So you got to pitch it. And that's where it came from. So we immediately went into the weeds, because I remember distinctly the reaction from management to 52 parallel worlds was, well, we got to know what's on each of them. We got to map them out. I want to know exactly who's on each. And my head exploded like that. No, this is exactly the opposite point of what we're trying to do here. The reason you have 52 parallel worlds is you want mystery. You want a chance to discover things over the years. You want there to be a sense of awe and wonder. And the moment you codify everything and map it out and take it apart, and are that hidebound to defining it, it's just not as much fun. So that was a fight we had, but overall, I think it's worked out pretty well.
And overall, the way it works out now, you're back at DC, and
Yeah.
now the multiverse
Yeah.
is bigger than ever. It's like the crisis never happened. How's it feel being back?
Oh, great. I mean, really great. They threw open the doors for me. Like, they really were great about it. There was one day, when I got 3 different phone calls all at once from different editors, because management had changed and therefore there were more opportunities now. There was no longer like a blacklist of writers from the 90s and aughts who were considered old dinosaurs. And so phones started ringing off the hook, and that was great. And so Scott Snyder championed me for that one death metal story. That was my entry back in. I had a ball doing that. Everybody was great about it. And now there's other stuff. We haven't announced anything yet. We can't really talk about it, but I think that people will be pretty pleased with what I'm coming out with in the next year with DC.
Does it involve a guy that is visible on both our screens?
I can neither confirm nor deny.
Speaking of, is there in fact somebody that you wish you had a larger run on, and why is it Superman?
Exactly, Superman. It's flatly Superman, because I could tell Superman stories till the end of time. I mean, everybody says, oh, he's a hard character to write. Oh, just no, he's the easiest character in the world to write. It's just, you got to get in that head. You got to think about what your life would be like if you were that alone, if you were that apart from humanity and yet trying to be part of it. What the tragedies that you have to deal with, the responsibility on you to always use your powers for good and never for personal gain, and when you can do anything in the world. I could write those stories to the end of time. So, I'm sure that between now and the end of time, I'll get a chance.
How do you respond to people who say that he's too powerful and it's unrealistic that somebody so powerful could be so good?
I say a couple of things. First off, it's unrealistic that he be that good, but it's fine with you that he flies. It doesn't track. You know what? It's comic books. These characters were created for this very reason. The moment you start imposing real world strictures, real world, confinements on characters like Superman, you're doing them an injustice. I don't care what Superman will be like in the real world. That's not what anybody wants to see. That's not how he was created. He was created by 2 Jewish boys who were helpless 17-year-old kids who were picked on, and he was created to do the impossible. He was created to do the impossible. And if he's not doing the impossible in your story, then it's not a great Superman story. So when you start cramming that sort of, well, what would he be like in the real world? Or, if he were in the real world, he wouldn't really be like this. Well, he's not in the real world. So just let it go. That's, if you want to read those kind of stories, that's awesome. But there's a million other places you can go. This is Superman. And as far as the power level, yeah, that's what's cool about him as a writer. He can do anything. And therefore, the challenges that he deals with, the foes that he fights, the battles that he has to win are less interesting if they're Superman versus Metallo, and they're more interesting when they're Superman trying to figure out the best way to behave in the 21st century when everything is complicated, and trying to find the moral compass and the moral through line on every conflict. And then you load those up where there's not a clear cut yes and no. There's not necessarily a clear cut right and wrong. And then you put Superman into that story. That's his weakness, in a sense. Or let me rephrase that. That is a challenge that is worthy of him. And so that to me makes an interesting story. Also, Superman is one of the most vulnerable characters out there in the sense that he cares about everybody.
Yeah.
He cares about everybody. You can get to Superman through his heart. You can get to Superman through his conscience. You can get to Superman in ways that you can't get through to Batman or Green Lantern or Flash, because his empathy and his sense of compassion is the source of his strength, but it's also a vulnerability, not a weakness, but a vulnerability.
Being one of the definitive Superman and Captain America writers, who would you say is the more compassionate, more empathetic character?
Superman. I think by nature he has to be. I mean, that the difference is maybe this much, but I think that Superman by nature has to be because of the breadth of his powers, because he is a person who can do anything. If there's a chink in that compassion armor, if there's a flaw in that compassion, then the damage could be spectacular. Whereas Captain America is a human being at the end of the day. There's only so much damage you can do if he's not being compassionate.
Yeah, and also Captain America fought in World War II, so
yes, Captain America has punched more people in the mouth than Superman. So I again, Steve's a great guy. Steve is the moral compass of the Marvel universe, but he has his bad days. Superman doesn't have bad days, but Steve Rogers does.
I feel like there's been a lot of Elseworlds type stories recently where Superman has had bad days. And how do you feel about the influx of that? You wrote a couple of Irredeemable, Incorruptible. So
yeah, I think that I think it's fair game as long as you're. I mean, with Irredeemable, it wasn't on the face of it. It was what if Superman were nuts? That's the log line, right? What if somebody like Superman were completely insane, and how would he? But that really wasn't to me what the story was about. What the question was, what if Superman hadn't been raised by the Kents? What if Superman had felt like an alien all his life? What if Superman felt like he was constantly being judged and had no, because he was not raised by the Kents, he had no real sense of self and no real center, right? So that's what I really wrote about. The window dressing was, what if Superman weren't insane? But those are fun stories for me to write because you're digging deep in ways that you can't necessarily with that character. That I know I'm splitting hairs, but the ones that are just straight up parody, straight up, what if Superman were nuts and let's go, let's do fanboy stuff like have him, use his heat vision to kill a bunch of people or whatever. That's I don't know, but that's the easiest. That's the low hanging fruit, right? What would Superman do if he were bad? Is low hanging fruit. What would Superman be like if he weren't raised by the Kents? That's a deeper question to me, and that makes it a much more interesting story.
We're running out of time, so to close this off, would you mind if we played some word association?
Be my guest. Although I'll if you want, I'll give you a couple extra minutes because I can tell you the one great flaw in the Return of Barry Allen story. If you want to hear it.
Yeah. Okay.
It's one I only realized a few years ago, and no one has ever called me out on this. As a writer, I kick myself. The big reveal of the Reverse Flash works only if you know who the Reverse Flash is. And there should have been a place in an earlier issue where I had the character introduced somewhere so that he wouldn't come as a complete surprise.
I never thought of that because my first ever comic books were Who's Who in the DC universe.
Yeah.
So
but
I'm like, okay.
Yeah. I kicked myself on that because but it's a good teaching moment because I'm working on a story right now, for instance, that is that same kind of reveal, but I have to then be very careful to make sure I put, to use Chekhov's, analogy, I have to make sure I put the gun on the mantelpiece so you see it before I fire it in Act 3. So anyway, that's just putting that out there.
But
okay.
That's what's one of the most interesting thing about comics though, right? Is because the way, if to somebody who doesn't know who the Reverse Flash was, the reaction might be, who the hell is the Reverse Flash? But the reaction might also be, wait, who the hell is the Reverse Flash? I got to find out more about him.
It might be, but as a storyteller, like if you're just looking at it from pure storytelling craft, it's better to have introduced the character somehow. Even just a statue of him in the background somewhere in the Flash Museum, anything. But I can't beat myself up too much about 35-year-old mistakes. So let's do some word association.
Word association. I'm going to name some artists and writers that you've worked with. Just give me a sentence or so. Okay. Mike Wieringo.
The best. I mean, never better. Could draw anything. Was hungry to draw anything. I would call him up and say, I need this scene to happen in an auto repair shop. Is that okay? Because that's a lot of work. And he was like, I've never drawn an auto repair shop before. I've never drawn an infinite library before. Sure, bring it on. That was Mike.
Do you have you wish you saw his evolution from the Flash to Fantastic Four. It's huge, right? And he was already great on the Flash.
He was already great on the Flash, but the FF stuff was just phenomenal. I've got pages of that stuff hanging on the walls here.
Paul Ryan,
great guy, solid storyteller, which was important to me. I remember at the time we had to choose a new Flash artist, and Paul was one of the candidates. And the editor was pushing for somebody who was a little showier, a little more, glitzy, a little more modern looking, if you will. But they couldn't tell a story, and that's important to me. So I'd rather go with the guy who was not as spectacularly flashy, fanboy favorite, and somebody who could just tell the damn story. And Paul, again, could do anything.
So solid. But then you got Paul Pelletier, who was
same thing.
Yeah,
same thing. Paul was the only difference is that Paul would yell at me for having him draw things. I mean, not really yell, but he would yell at me for having him draw things that seemed pretty goddamn impossible. So, whereas Paul would just take it all in stride. But I love Paul. Paul Pelletier. He and I played pool a lot in back in the day, and good solid guy. I miss working with him.
This is a big one, George Perez.
Just the best. I mean, crazy. George is crazy. George is absolutely batshit nuts, if I can say that on your podcast.
That's fine.
In the best possible way. I remember when we did Brave and Bold, the team-up book, I knew I wanted to do a Batman and Legion crossover. And we had to do a cover before I came up with the actual story. And George says, what do you want on the cover? I said, well, just remember, if you put them on the, I only figure I'm going to put like 5 or 6 Legionnaires in this story. I had an idea, let me rephrase it. I had an idea for the story. I just didn't have it finished yet. I said, there's only really like 5 or 6 Legionnaires in this story. If you put another character on the cover, I've got to put them in the story. So just be judicious there. And so he turns in a cover with every single Legionnaire, including the dead ones. And I'm just, so now I thanks George. I've got it turned out to be a pretty good story, but man, George is the artist who will always give you 4 panels when you ask for 1. And because we were working plot dialogue, as I would give him the plot, he would work out the pencils, and I'd come back and do the final dialogue. I would have something like splash page, Adam Strange and Hawkman. And I'd get the page back, and he'd be like 5 panels on the page. Here's a big shot of Adam Strange and Hawkman, and here's a shot of Adam Strange fighting, and here's a shot of Hawkman, and here's a shot of Supergirl who just arrived on the scene. And I have to come up with dialogue for all of these characters too, because this wasn't in my script, but I got to come up with something. There is a moment where I'll just keep going for a second. There's a moment in, I want to say it's issue 11. There's the wedding of Aquaman and Mira, which we did a flashback to. And George had to recreate that scene. And this is George. This is my George story. So George is drawing the story. And in the original 1963 story that we were riffing off of, and the cover, specific cover image of the Justice League and the Teen Titans and all these guys at the bottom of the sea watching Aquaman's wedding, Wonder Woman in that image didn't have a helmet on. Because back in that day, she was so super invulnerable, nobody thought about it. And again, it's comics. We're getting ready to do this scene again, and George says, "Oh, should I put a helmet on her?" I said, "Well, I mean, in current continuity, she doesn't really have this ability to breathe underwater that I know of. She probably should." And George is like, "But that wasn't what it looked like back in 1963. I'll just draw her without a helmet." I said, "Okay." I said, "Okay. All right, but if you do that, I got to figure out how to explain this." So, as luck would have it, I know. And this is true, God help me, I know this level of detail. Wonder Woman's earrings actually were a gift from the gods to allow her to breathe in space and underwater. So I said, all right, you know what? Just make sure she got the earrings on, but don't draw any attention to it, because then I got to explain that. Just make sure she's there. And then people who know this, it's a little in joke for them, they understand. I get the pages back, and my hand to God, there's a panel of Wonder Woman going, "Look, earrings." And then Mira going, "Oh, I like your earrings." So I love George. I would work with George anytime, anywhere. But oh my God, the curves he would throw me.
I remember
but in the best possible way, because again, he was indulging his fanboy self, and that's great.
I remember when he was diagnosed with tendinitis, my reaction was, "Oh, that's terrible." But at the same time, why did it take so long?
He would, he's the guy who you will ask for one character on a page and he will draw 30. So God bless him.
I love it. Chris Samnee.
Amazing. One of the best flat out storytellers I've ever worked with. Insanely underrated, because with the Daredevil stuff was mostly me at first, and then the two of us really got in a working rhythm where he didn't need full scripts. He, a lot of times with the action sequences and stuff, I could just, or some of the scenes, I just say, here's the scene. Here's the basic idea. You choreograph it. You do the pacing, which he wanted to do. I wouldn't ask an artist to do that if they didn't want to do that, but he wanted to do that. And so his storytelling was impeccable. And then we went on to Black Widow because we were looking for something else to do. And I didn't have the time really to devote to it. I said, all right, if you do the heavy lifting, and I'll just come along in dialogue, I'm fine with that, but I want you to get the credit for that. And it bothers me that even though it's credited to both of us, even though we say on all the credit pages, it's plot by Chris Samnee, whenever it's brought up, people go, hey, I really like Mark Waid's Black Widow. And I just kind of wince because that's great to hear, but that's not Mark Waid's Black Widow. It's Chris Samnee's Black Widow, and Mark Waid is just hanging on for dear life.
It's funny. And Ron Garney.
Amazing. A very energetic. What's the word I want to use here? Volatile sounds pejorative, but I don't mean it that way. I mean that when I work with him, he was sort of bursting with energy and bursting with enthusiasm and bursting, not in a gosh boy fanboy, but more in a you never know how he's going to react next to something, but he's going to be energetic and passionate about it. He's very passionate. There you go. There's my one word association with Ron, passionate.
Yeah. And finally, what about Marcos Martin?
Marcos, again, like Chris, consummate storyteller. What I love about Marcos is that he finds new ways to use the language of comics in a way that the other artists don't. Just little things that he does. When we did that Daredevil story in issue 1, where it's a 2-page spread of Matt reacting to New York around him, and he just kind of zeroed in on certain things that Matt would hear and see, and it's a great spread. It's a great way of him he just uses a bunch of different storytelling techniques that most people don't use, and that's invaluable to me.
And I forgot somebody, Paolo Rivera.
Again, Paolo, incredibly underrated. I wish Paolo had stayed with the book, but he wanted to go off and do his own stuff, which is terrific. I salute that, but I miss working with, and I call Paolo like every couple of years going, please come back to mainstream comics. Let's do something. Thinking of using the Spot, that was Paolo's idea. Using Claw, that was Paolo's idea. Using, the whole thing about Coyote and the headless Matt Murdock, that's Paolo's ideas. So he was astounding. I look forward to seeing whatever he does next.
I love how basically a lot of this interview has come down to think about your characters, put yourself in the head of your characters, and put yourself in the head of your artists.
Yes.
It sounds like a whole lot of it is about empathy in both
cases, I guess so. Yeah. It really is. Like I said, it's my story until such time as I finish the script, and then when I hand it over to the artist, then it's our story. And I don't need you to be an art robot. Like I said, I need you to be invested. I need to be working with people who are as excited about the story as I am, because when somebody isn't excited about the story, you can tell. Like, you may not be able to look at it immediately and go, oh, that artist isn't terribly excited about the story, but you can just sense it. You can't fake enthusiasm. So I got to work with people who are just as jazzed as I am.
And do you have anything you want to plug before we go?
What am I doing now that we can talk about? At this exact moment in time, there's nothing that I'm writing that I think we can talk about, although there will be more soon. But I am also serving as the publisher of Humanoids in the US. And they're the highly respected European publishers with the Ink Owl and Meta Barons, Jodorowsky stuff, Mobius's stuff, and they're doing American graphic novels. And I've been their publisher there for about a year. And even though it's been very challenging in a pandemic to try to create comics and sell them, it's very rewarding. And so we've got a lot of good humanoid stuff coming up in the next few months. And I encourage people who are not wedded to superheroes and still are looking for good original graphic novel stuff, whether it's biographical stuff or whether it's high adventure stuff or whatever, check out some of the humanoid stuff. I think it's worth looking at.
Humanoids is printed in European dimensions as well, right?
Generally, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So much bigger and hardback.
Bandisonné, yeah.
Good stuff.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Waid. This was awesome.
Bet. My pleasure, sir. Talk to you again sometime.
Thank you.